Mr. Pichai, did Google ever use its surveillance over web traffic to identify competitive threats?
Congressman, just like other businesses, we try to understand trends from data which we can see, and we use it to improve our products for our users. But we are really focused on improving our products, and that's how search
I appreciate
works.
that, Mr. Pichai. Google's own documents and numerous interviews with companies affected by this conduct show that Google did just that, which is very disturbing and very anti-competitive. In addition to stealing content, Google also began to privilege its own sites. An investigative report published just yesterday found that 63% of web searches that start on Google also end somewhere on Google's own websites.
And I'm glad you mentioned privacy, because I would be remiss if I didn't deal with this issue, because it is so relevant. And I think generally speaking, outside of the political issues and the biases with all of this, and this is for essentially all four of our witnesses, I think one of our bigger concerns when we talk about data and value, and that data having value and privacy, which is where people really get concerned with how the digital age is moving forward. And there are news reports that law enforcement has made increasing use of what are called geofence warrants. And these geofence warrants allow authorities to compel technology companies to disclose location records for any device in a certain area at a particular time. Court filings suggest that Google received a 1,500% increase in geofence requests from 2017 to 2018, and a 500% increase from 2018 till 2019. And so the Fourth Amendment requires probable cause and specificity, and that's not what these are. These warrants are essentially for any person in an area at a particular time, and geofence warrants require neither. So unless accompanied by particularized information and identifying a subject, geo warrants are essentially general warrants. I believe that the location information should be considered as contents of the Electronic Communications Act under the Stored Communications Act. Do you agree?
Happy to understand more. We deeply care about this. Is why we issue transparency reports, because we think it's an important area for Congress to have oversight. And we recently made a change by which we automatically delete location activity after a certain period of time by default for our users. So we are happy to engage with your office, Congressman, and
I'm using you because these are going on in Virginia and New York, I think, right now. But I mean, this equates for everything. I think people would be terrified to know that law enforcement could grab general warrants and get everybody's information anywhere.
Mr. Pichai, in 2007, Google purchased DoubleClick, the leading provider of certain advertising tools. Is that correct?
That's correct, Congresswoman.
When Google proposed the merger, alarm bells were raised about the access to data Google would have, specifically the ability to connect a user's personal identity with their browsing activity. Google, however, committed to Congress and to the antitrust enforcers that the deal would not reduce user privacy. Google chief legal advisor testified before the Senate Antitrust Subcommittee that Google wouldn't be able to merge this data even if it wanted to, given contractual restrictions. But in June of 2016, Google went ahead and merged this data anyway, effectively destroying anonymity on the internet. Mr. Pichai, you became CEO of Google in 2015, is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, and this change was made in 2016, is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you for that. Did you sign off on this decision to combine the sets of data with that Google had told Congress would be kept separate?
Congresswoman, any changes we made,
Mr. Pichai, with all due respect, please, did you sign off on the decision or not?
I review at a high level all important decisions we make. We deeply care about privacy and security of our users.
So you signed off on the decision?
User consent for.
Okay, you signed off on the decision. Practically, this decision meant that your company would not combine would now combine, for example, all of my data on Google, my search history, my location from Google Maps, information from my emails from Gmail, as well as my personal identity with the record of almost all of the websites I visited. That is absolutely staggering. According to an email from a DoubleClick executive, that was exactly the type of reduction in user privacy that Google's founders had previously worried would lead to a backlash. And I quote, "They were unwavering on the policy due to philosophical reasons, which is Larry and Sergey's fundamentally not wanting users associated with a cross-site cookie. They were also worried about a privacy storm as well as damage to Google's brand." So in 2007, Google's founders feared making this change because they knew it would upset their users. But in 2016, Google didn't seem to care. Mr. Pakai, isn't it true that what changed between 2007 and 2016 is that Google gained enormous market power? So while Google had to care about user privacy in 2007, it no longer had to in 2016. Would you agree that what changed was Google gained enormous market power?
Congresswoman, this is an important issue. If I could explain. Well, we today make it very easy for users to be in control of their data. We have simplified their settings. They can turn ads personalization on or off. We have combined most of activity settings into 3 groupings. We remind users to go do a privacy checkup. 1 billion users have done so.
Okay, Mr. Pakai, thank you so much for that. I am concerned that Google's bait and switch with DoubleClick is part of a broader pattern where Google buys up companies for the purposes of surveilling Americans, and because of Google's dominance, users have no choice but to surrender. In 2019, Google made over 80% of its total revenue through selling of ad placement. Is that correct, Mr. Pakai? About
majority of
80%?
the business.
Yeah, okay. And because Google sells behavioral ads targeted to each of us as individuals, the more user data that Google collects, the more money Google can make. More user data means more money. Is that correct?
In general, that's not true. For example, when
More
you come
user
in
data,
when you type,
not the more
most
money
of the data
Google
we need is built into
collects?
the query.
I'm sorry, please. So you're saying that the more user data does not mean the more money that Google can collect?
Congresswoman, most of the data today we collect is to help users and provide personalized experiences back. Ad
Okay,
data
thank you
is
so
not
much,
relevant
Mr.
with time at
Pakai.
all.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
So the question is there an inherent conflict of interest because you are a data company? You know when customers put something in their cart, when they take it out. Traditional brick and mortar stores like a grocery store where competition occurs don't have that. And so I just want to follow up finally on an answer to the question that you gave to Congressman Jayapal. You said that you can't guarantee that the policy of not sharing third-party sellers' data with Amazon's own line hasn't been violated. You couldn't be certain. Can you please explain that to me? Can you list examples of where that policy has been violated? Because it's particularly concerning to me, Mr. Bezos, that shouldn't third parties know for sure that data isn't being shared with your own line, their competitors? Why should a third-party seller list their product on Amazon if they're just going to be undercut by Amazon's own product as a result of data you take from them?
Sir, I think what I want you to understand, and I think is important to understand, is that we have a policy against using individual seller data to compete with our private label products.
You couldn't assure Ms. Jayapal that that policy isn't violated routinely.
Well, we are investigating that, and I do not want to sit here, and I do not want to go beyond what I know right now. But we are, as a result of that Wall Street Journal article, we are looking at that very carefully,
Thank you,
and
Mr.
we want to
Bezos.
get those facts,
The
and I will
evidence
surely
we've-
share them with you.
Google, meanwhile, maintains its dominance in part through aggregating data from across its products and services. Mr. Pichai, I understand that Google collects user data on users' browsing activity through its Chrome browser. Does Google use that data for its own purposes, either in advertising or to develop and refine its algorithms?
Mr. Chairman, we do use data to improve our products and services for our users. Anytime we do it, we believe in giving users choice, control, and transparency. We make it very clear, and we give them simplified settings to choose how they like their data to use.
And So you do use the data that you get from these companies for your purposes.
My understanding was whether we use data in general to improve our products and services, and we do use data to show ads.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Facebook is dominant not just in the social media market, but also in its digital surveillance capabilities. In 2012, Facebook had several tools that allowed it to conduct digital surveillance, including trackers, Facebook's like button, Facebook login, and a series of application programming interfaces, or APIs. Mr. Zuckerberg, these tools provide Facebook with insights into its competitors' websites and apps. Isn't that correct? Yes or no?
Congressman, I think broadly the answer to what you're saying is yes.
Right.
We, like every other company here, do market research to understand what people are finding valuable.
All right, okay, so you're going beyond the scope of my question. I appreciate that answer, though. Mr. Zuckerberg, a few days before Facebook acquired Instagram, a Facebook vice president emailed you suggesting ways to improve Facebook's, quote, competitive research, end quote. By building a custom model, Facebook could improve its understanding of its competitors and, quote, make more bold decisions on whether they are friends or foes, end quote. Mr. Zuckerberg, how does Facebook improve its competitive research to distinguish friends from foe?
Congressman, I'm not sure exactly what he was referring to in that email there, but he is one of the people involved in running our analytics organization, and I think it's natural that he would, as part of his responsibility, be focused on market research and understanding more there.
And certainly, isn't it true that Facebook, after that conversation, purchased the web analytics company Onevo in 2013 to give Facebook more capability to monitor its competitors?
Congressman, I think you have the timing correct. After we purchased Onevo as part of our broader market research capacity.
And that would give you the capability to monitor your competitors, correct?
Congressman, it gave aggregate analytics as to what people were using and what people were finding valuable. Sort of like the type of product you would get from Nielsen or ComScore, some of these other third-party companies that provide similar data.
Well, Mr. Zuckerberg, that acquisition gave you non-public real-time data about engagement, usage, and how much time people spend on apps. And when it became public that Facebook was using Onevo to conduct digital surveillance, your company got kicked out of Apple's App Store. Isn't that true?
Congressman, I'm not sure I'd characterize it in that way. I think this was part of a broader
Onevo
policy
did
around.
get kicked out of the App Store. Isn't that true?
Congressman, I believe we took the app out after Apple changed their policies.
And it was
about what type of VPN apps.
it was because of the use of the surveillance tools.
Congressman, I'm not sure that the policy was worded that way, or that that's exactly the right characterization of it. But
Okay, well, let me ask you
but
this
Apple changed their
question.
policy.
Let me ask you this question. After Onevo was booted out of the App Store, you turned to other surveillance tools, such as Facebook Research app, correct?
Congressman, in general, yes, we do a broad variety of market research, as do other
And
companies.
also, isn't it true, Mr. Zuckerberg, that Facebook paid teenagers to sell their privacy by installing Facebook Research app?
Congressman, I'm not familiar with that, but I think it's a general practice to be able to, that companies use to have different surveys and
well,
get, understand data from how people are using different products and what their preferences are.
Facebook Research app got thrown out of the App Store too, isn't that true?
Congressman, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, well, over nearly a decade, Mr. Zuckerberg, you led a sustained effort to surveil smaller competitors to benefit Facebook. These These were steps taken to abuse data, to harm competitors, and to shield Facebook from competition. You tried one thing and then you got caught, made some apologies, then you did it all over again.
Mr. Pichai, similarly, there was an article just today, or excuse me, yesterday, from The Verge. The title is "Google Reportedly Keeps Tabs on Usage of Rival Android Apps to Develop Competitors." And I'll quote from the article, Google said that the data doesn't give information about how people behave while they're using individual apps, but it wouldn't say whether it had been used to develop competing apps. So I guess first, I take it you would confirm that Google does have access to confidential information or ultimately competitively sensitive information about apps on the Android devices?
Congressman, if I could clarify this. Today, we have an API which is available for other developers as long as users consent. This gives us system health metrics. This is how we can launch digital well-being features on Android. This is how we understand which apps are using battery, and we can give a dashboard which shows, maybe for crashing or quality control or for battery usage or for digital well-being. So at a high level, this data is available through a public API, and other developers can avail as long as the users give consent to it.
So, Mr. Pichai, I just want to clarify, again, I'll quote from this article. The article refers to this data as sensitive data about other apps, including how often they're opened and for how long they're used. I'm not asking how you use that information. I'm just asking whether or not, in fact, what the article alleges it is correct, that you do have access to that data.
With user consent and the APIs exist, yes, we do.
And does Google use
and it's
that?
critical for us to have access to that so that we can maintain this is how we understand and we can, improve resource usage of applications.
Thank you so much. Mr. Zuckerberg, in 2004, there were dozens of social media companies. Facebook distinguished itself from the competitors by focusing specifically on privacy. You had a short, clear privacy policy. It was just 950 words. It made a promise to users, and I quote, "We do not and will not use cookies to collect private information from any user." And you said, "will not." That's a commitment about the future, and that was 2004. Mr. Zuckerberg, today, does Facebook use cookies to collect private information on users?
Congresswoman, my understanding to that is no. We're not using cookies to collect private information about people who use our services, and I believe we've upheld that commitment.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Zuckerberg, do you think that your company would be as successful if it had started with today's cookies policy in place?
Congresswoman, I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to, but in general, cookies is not a big part of how we're collecting information. We've primarily used them to make sure that someone can stay logged in on web. We use them to some degree for security, to make sure that you don't have someone trying to log in under a lot of different accounts for one computer or something like that.
So, Mr. Zuckerberg, once again, you do not use cookies?
Congresswoman, just to make
Yes
sure
or
I'm
no?
clear, we do use cookies.
Yes or no?
We do use cookies.
Okay.
Yes, we do use cookies.
Okay, so Mr. Zuckerberg, the bottom line here is that you broke a commitment to your users. And who can say if you may or may not do that again in the future? The reality is that Facebook's market power grew and Facebook sacrificed its users' policy.
Today, we had the opportunity to hear from the decision makers at 4 of the most powerful companies in the world. This hearing has made one fact clear to me. These companies, as they exist today, have monopoly power. Some need to be broken up, all need to be properly regulated and held accountable. We need to ensure the antitrust laws first written more than a century ago work in the digital age. When these laws were written, the monopolists were men named Rockefeller and Carnegie. Their control of the marketplace allowed them to do whatever it took to crush independent businesses and expand their own power. Well, the names have changed, but the story is the same. Today, the men are named Zuckerberg, Cook, Pichai, and Bezos. Once again, their control of the marketplace allows them to do whatever it takes to crush independent business and expand their own power. This must end. This subcommittee will next publish a report on the findings of our investigation. We will propose solutions to the problems before us. As a great American Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis once said, we must make our choice. We may have democracy or we may have wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we can't have both. This concludes today's hearing. Thank you again to our witnesses for attending. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witnesses or additional materials for the record. And without objection, this hearing is adjourned.